You really think you can scare me? Ryan Carter's voice cracked the tension in the air, pointing the standard-issue pistol at the stoic figure across the training yard, the sun glaring off his polished boots, the heat rippling off asphalt and canvas tents. Walter Thompson didn't flinch. His eyes, pale and piercing, scanned the three cadets before him without a trace of fear. The faint breeze carried the scent of pine from the nearby woods and the dry tang of sweat from the nervous youths, but Walter's presence cut through it all like a calm before a storm. Lucas Brooks leaned forward slightly, smirking, the gun trembling in his grip more from adrenaline than intent, and Mike Hensley added a sarcastic, "You're not going to move, old man? Not even an inch." Walter's hand brushed a worn USMC patch on his jacket, faded olive green threads fraying at the edges, and the movement was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet it carried a weight that made the cadets pause, their smirks faltering for a fraction of a second. The afternoon sunlight caught the glint of a small M40 rifle resting in its weathered case beside him, scratches and dents speaking of decades in jungles far away, but Walter didn't touch it. Instead, he exhaled slowly, letting the weight of his silence hang heavier than any threat the cadets could muster. The wind shifted, brushing the dry heat over the asphalt, and for the first time, the cadets noticed the faint tremor in the leaves of the nearby training flag, a subtle signal that they were on the edge of something beyond their understanding. Ryan's voice wavered as he tried again, louder, sharper. "Step aside, or we make you." There was no bravado in Walter's reply, only a calm, steady tone. "I suggest you reconsider." Mike scoffed, shaking his head, eyes darting between the gun and the old man, and Lucas laughed, attempting to mask his uncertainty. Walter's gaze drifted to the rifle case, then back to the cadets, and in that instant, the training yard seemed to dissolve. The echoes of helicopter blades, the hum of engines, and the wet, earthy smell of jungle mud filled his mind. He was 20 again, crawling under dense foliage, hands steady on a rifle, pulling his wounded comrade to cover while the rain pounded the canopy above, the smell of cordite thick in the humid air. The images flashed like strobe lights, the gunfire, the shouted orders, the hiss of mortars in the distance, all converging into a memory that was as alive as the sun on the training yard now. Jamie, a cadet who had been watching from the edge, noticed a subtle change in Walter's stance, the slight narrowing of his eyes, the faint set of his shoulders, and felt an instinctive unease, sensing that this old man was not merely a relic. The pistol wavered in Ryan's hand, his confidence cracking as the air seemed to thicken, each heartbeat echoing like a drum in the still afternoon. Walter's lips moved slightly, almost a whisper. "It's not the gun that matters, it's the choices you make." The words carried an authority born of decades unseen by these cadets, and in that split second, the world of their training exercises shrank to the measure of Walter's calm, a quiet gravity that drew the heat and the tension into itself, leaving the cadets suspended between fear and awe, the wind carrying nothing but the hum of realization that this encounter was no ordinary confrontation, and that the lessons of honor and restraint were about to unfold in ways they could not yet comprehend. The tension lingered as Walter adjusted the strap of his worn M40 rifle, the leather soft from decades of handling, the metal slightly scuffed and dulled, a silent testament to years of careful maintenance. The cadets' hands began to sweat, their fingers brushing against the smooth wood of the pistol grips, the sun baking the training yard into a shimmering haze, the asphalt reflecting heat in small waves that distorted their view. Ryan shifted uncomfortably, the weight of the situation pressing down like the heavy summer air, and Mike let out a nervous cough, the sound sharp and out of place, breaking the unnatural silence. Walter did not move from his stance, his eyes tracing the edges of the yard, noting the position of each cadet, the way their postures betrayed uncertainty despite their outward bravado. Lucas took a half-step closer, trying to assert dominance, but found himself hesitating, the quiet authority emanating from Walter filling the space between them like a physical barrier. The old man's hand lingered over the edge of the rifle case, feeling the contours of the metal beneath, and for a moment, the cadets could almost see the years compressed into his posture, the countless mornings of training, the endless drills, the silent endurance of long days in the field. The flag above the main tent snapped lightly in a breeze, fluttering as if in acknowledgement, and the faint hum of distant machinery became a steady background rhythm, almost like the heartbeat of the yard itself. Walter's lips moved, voice low and measured, carrying a cadence that drew attention without demanding it. "You are learning more than you know by standing there." Jamie, the observing cadet at the edge of the formation, felt a chill of understanding ripple through him, the tension in his chest tightening as the presence of experience weighed heavier than any order or rank he had ever known. The sun shifted, casting elongated shadows across the concrete, the glint catching on Walter's pale eyes, highlighting the intensity and depth within them, and the younger men could no longer ignore the subtle signs of mastery, the quiet precision of a life lived with focus and discipline. The rifles and pistols in their hands felt suddenly cumbersome, the mock confidence evaporating, replaced by a strange respect that had no words but spoke volumes. Walter shifted slightly, just enough to indicate awareness, his movements deliberate and unhurried, and as he did, the cadets could almost feel the history contained in his posture, the battles, the camaraderie, the silent victories that no one in the yard had witnessed. Each breath they drew was heavier, laden with the realization that the old man before them had commanded respect in situations far beyond their imagination, yet he required none here, allowing his presence alone to communicate authority. The distant call of a training bell echoed, but it felt muted, overshadowed by the stillness that had fallen, the heat of the day mingling with a coolness that seemed to emanate from Walter himself. Ryan's jaw tightened, Lucas's eyes darted nervously, and Mike lowered the pistol fractionally, the energy of the yard shifting imperceptibly, the tension now infused with a recognition that this was not a simple exercise in bravado, but a moment that would linger in memory, teaching a lesson not of fear, but of restraint, observation, and the power of unspoken command. Walter's voice, soft yet unmistakable, cut through the haze. "Understand that authority is earned, not claimed." And the words settled like stones in the air, grounding the cadets, compelling them to absorb, to watch, and to reconsider, as the sun continued its relentless march across the sky, casting light on a scene charged with gravity, history, and quiet, undeniable mastery. Ryan felt the words settle over the yard like a weight he could not explain. The confidence that had carried him through countless training exercises seemed thinner now, stretched tight against something older and stronger than rank or procedure. He looked at Walter again and noticed details he had ignored before. The faded stitching on the Marine Corps patch, the weathered leather of the rifle case, the deep lines etched into the old man's face, not from age alone, but from years spent under suns far harsher than this one. A gust of wind rolled across the open training ground, rattling loose canvas on a nearby shelter. The sound carried through the afternoon like distant applause. Nobody spoke. Even the usual chatter from the obstacle course 100 yards away seemed strangely absent. Walter stood motionless, yet somehow commanded more attention than every instructor on the base combined. Lucas swallowed hard and glanced toward Ryan. Neither wanted to be the first to back down. Pride had trapped them in a situation they no longer understood. Mike shifted his weight and lowered his arm completely. The training pistol now hung at his side. He told himself it was because the exercise had gone far enough, but deep down he knew the truth. Something about the old Marine made continuing feel wrong. Not dangerous. Wrong. Jamie continued watching from the edge of the yard. The feeling growing in his stomach was no longer uncertainty. It was recognition. His grandfather had been a Marine. He remembered family gatherings where old veterans sat quietly while everyone else talked. They rarely told stories. They rarely spoke about themselves at all. But there had always been a certain stillness around them. The same stillness stood before him now. Jamie reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He hesitated. Then he opened the base directory. Walter noticed the movement without looking directly at him. The old Marine's eyes remained fixed on the cadets in front of him, but decades of observation had taught him to see everything. The corners of his mouth moved almost imperceptibly. Not a smile. Something closer to understanding. The afternoon sun slipped lower, casting long shadows across the concrete. Ryan cleared his throat. "Who are you?" The question came out quieter than he intended. Walter did not answer immediately. His gaze drifted beyond the cadets toward the distant tree line where the wind stirred the branches. For a moment, he seemed somewhere else entirely. Somewhere decades removed from this training yard. Nobody important, he finally said. Lucas almost laughed at the answer, but the sound never came. The words felt false the moment they left Walter's mouth. Nobody important did not stand like that. Nobody important did not carry silence like a shield. Nobody important did not make an entire group of cadets question themselves without raising his voice once. Jamie found the number he was looking for. Captain Ethan Mercer, Base Operations Liaison. His thumb hovered over the call button. He knew this could get him in trouble. Cadets were not supposed to bypass protocol, but instinct told him protocol was already broken. He pressed the button. The phone rang once, twice. Then a voice answered. Mercer speaking. Jamie turned slightly away from the group. Sir, I think you need to come to Training Yard 7. There was a pause. Why? Jamie looked back toward Walter. The old Marine stood framed against the afternoon sun, motionless and calm. Because something tells me this man is not who everyone thinks he is. On the other end of the line, Captain Mercer fell silent for several seconds. Then his voice changed. What is his name, Cadet? Jamie glanced toward the weathered patch, the rifle case, and the pale blue eyes that seemed to carry an entire lifetime. His name is Walter Thompson, sir. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything Jamie had heard all day. The sound of distant footsteps echoed across the training yard, a steady rhythm that grew louder as Captain Ethan Mercer approached, his polished uniform catching the last rays of the afternoon sun. The three cadets froze, the pistols now hanging loosely at their sides, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. Walter Thompson remained unmoved, his pale blue eyes following every movement without haste, the soft rustle of his jacket and the faint creak of the leather strap across his shoulder the only indication of life. Captain Mercer stepped into the open, his expression a mixture of surprise and immediate recognition, the weight of protocol and respect settling over him like the evening shadow stretching across the concrete. He paused for a moment, taking in the full scene, the cadets standing stiffly, unsure whether to move or speak, and Walter, standing calm and centered, a presence that seemed larger than the space itself. Ryan swallowed hard, feeling the heat of the day shift from the sun to the sudden authority filling the yard. Mercer's gaze flicked to the worn Marine Corps patch and the scuffed rifle case at Walter's side, then back to the cadets, his voice steady, yet carrying an edge that commanded attention. Cadets, lower your weapons. The three men obeyed immediately, the weight of unspoken judgment pressing them into a straight posture, the afternoon air thick with tension. Walter finally shifted, a subtle movement, enough to draw attention to the faint creases in his jacket and the way the light glinted off the worn leather of the rifle case. In that small motion, decades of history seemed to ripple outward, a silent testament to a life of discipline, courage, and quiet leadership. Mike Hensley's hand brushed the pistol, realizing it had become more a symbol of ignorance than authority. Lucas Brooks stepped back, his eyes drawn to Walter's calm stance, the surety of each step he had taken over countless training exercises and real-world scenarios far beyond the cadet's imagination. Jamie, still on the edge of the yard, watched the interaction with a mix of relief and astonishment, understanding now why he had felt the shift earlier, the subtle power that does not raise its voice but cannot be ignored. Mercer approached Walter, extending a hand not in challenge but in acknowledgement, a gesture that carried decades of mutual respect, and Walter accepted it, the motion fluid, practiced, and measured, a simple nod acknowledging the weight of recognition without fanfare. The sun dipped lower, casting elongated shadows, and the cadets felt the enormity of the moment settle over them. Each detail became amplified, the faint creak of the case, the slight narrowing of Walter's eyes as he assessed each cadet, the even breathing that betrayed no haste or concern. Ryan glanced around, noticing the subtle cues of authority, experience, and history etched into the scene. The wind stirred, lifting the edge of the canvas tent, the sound whispering across the yard, almost like the hushed breath of countless battles long past, battles that had honed a man into what he was today. Walter's voice, low and steady, finally broke the silence, not as a command but as a lesson carried on a calm, deliberate tone. Respect is not given because of fear or rank. It is earned, understood, and remembered. The cadets absorbed it, their posture loosening slightly, eyes wide with newfound understanding. The rifles now completely irrelevant in the presence of quiet mastery. Mercer stepped back, allowing the scene to settle, the tension replaced by a solemn clarity, the weight of experience and dignity leaving a profound impression as the sun began its final descent behind the distant tree-line, bathing the yard in warm amber light that seemed to hold the memory of the day and the history of a marine legend standing silently among them. Captain Mercer kept his eyes on Walter for several long seconds after the yard fell silent. There was no confusion in his expression now, only certainty. The kind of certainty that comes when a name connects to memories, records, and stories passed quietly through generations of Marines. The evening air had cooled slightly, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass from the far side of the base. Somewhere in the distance, a transport truck rolled across a service road, its engine humming softly beneath the growing silence. Ryan noticed that Mercer had not asked Walter for identification. He had not questioned his presence. He had not demanded an explanation. That realization struck harder than any reprimand could have. The captain already knew enough. Mercer glanced toward Jamie. Who made the call? Jamie raised his hand cautiously. I did, sir. Mercer nodded once. Good instinct. The simple words seemed to surprise everyone present, especially Jamie. Then Mercer looked back toward Walter. I apologize for this situation. Walter shook his head gently. No need. His voice carried the same calm weight as before. They are young. Young people test boundaries. It is how they learn. Ryan felt embarrassment burn across his face. The old Marine had every reason to humiliate them, every reason to make an example of them. Instead, he was defending them. The realization settled heavily in his chest. Lucas stared at the ground while Mike folded his arms, unable to meet Walter's eyes. Mercer took a slow breath. They have no idea who you are, do they? Walter gave a faint smile. That is not their fault. The answer seemed to carry memories hidden beneath its surface. Memories of years spent avoiding attention. Years spent letting accomplishments remain buried beneath ordinary life. The captain's gaze drifted toward the weathered rifle case. You still keep it with you. Walter looked down briefly. His hand rested against the worn leather. The fading sunlight reflected softly across the old brass buckle. Every now and then, for a moment his eyes seemed to focus on something far away. Beyond the training yard, beyond the base itself, the smell of pine disappeared from his senses. In its place came damp jungle air and the steady rhythm of rain tapping against broad leaves. He remembered standing beside a young Marine barely old enough to shave. He remembered nervous faces waiting for leadership during a moment when confidence mattered more than words. The years had passed, but certain lessons never faded. A gust of wind pulled him back to the present. The training yard returned. The tents, the concrete, the cadets standing awkwardly before him. Mercer noticed the distant look in Walter's eyes. He had seen it before in older veterans. The look of someone carrying memories too important to forget and too personal to explain. The captain reached for his phone. There is somebody who should know you are here. Walter immediately frowned. That is not necessary. Mercer almost smiled. With respect, sir, I think it is. Before Walter could answer, the captain stepped aside and made the call. Ryan watched as Mercer's posture changed the moment the line connected. His shoulders straightened. His voice became formal, professional, respectful. The conversation was brief, less than 30 seconds. Yet by the time Mercer ended the call, the color had drained from his face. He lowered the phone slowly. The cadets exchanged nervous glances. Something had changed. Something significant. Mercer looked directly at Walter. Sir, he said quietly, they are coming. Walter closed his eyes for a moment and released a long breath. Not frustration, not fear, more like resignation. The expression lasted only a second before disappearing. Ryan noticed it immediately. Whatever was about to happen next, even Walter Thompson had not expected it. The distant rumble of an approaching vehicle grew louder across the yard, a steady, authoritative cadence that immediately drew the attention of every person present. Walter Thompson remained motionless, yet his presence seemed to anticipate the shift in the atmosphere before any footsteps could reach them. Ryan, Mike, and Lucas instinctively straightened, their earlier bravado replaced by a creeping sense of humility, the pistols they had carried now almost forgotten in their hands. The vehicle came to a stop with a soft crunch on the asphalt, and a black SUV door opened, revealing Colonel Richard Hayes, a tall man with sharp features and the unmistakable bearing of someone who had spent decades enforcing discipline and earning respect. The captain signaled subtly, and the cadets instinctively stepped back, creating a small corridor that seemed to stretch across the concrete like a stage set for a revelation. Hayes walked with measured steps, each one echoing across the empty yard, his gaze locked on Walter, taking in the worn jacket, the faded Marine Corps patch, and the weathered leather of the rifle case. Walter tilted his head slightly in acknowledgement, a single, quiet gesture that conveyed decades of unspoken understanding. The colonel stopped a few paces away, scanning the cadets who now seemed smaller under the weight of his presence, their eyes lowered instinctively. He turned fully to Walter and extended his hand, firm yet respectful, a connection that spoke of a lifetime of shared values and honor. Walter grasped the hand, the motion deliberate and precise, the way a man who had practiced restraint and focus for decades might do, his grip steady and unyielding. The sun dipped lower, casting long, golden shadows across the yard, illuminating every detail. The worn patches, the slight creases in Walter's jacket, the shine of the rifle case, and the tension in the cadet's shoulders. Captain Mercer cleared his throat, breaking the near silence. Colonel Hayes, the cadets, they did not understand. I thought you should see for yourself. Hayes's gaze swept over Ryan, Mike, and Lucas, taking note of the uncertainty and sudden humility in their postures. His voice, deep and steady, filled the yard. Cadets, recognize that authority and mastery are earned, not claimed. Pay attention, for lessons of this magnitude do not come often. Walter lowered the rifle case to the ground carefully, each movement measured, and the soft scrape of leather against asphalt sounded unusually loud in the thick, quiet air. He glanced at the cadets, pale eyes steady and unwavering. It is not about proving anything to those who are unprepared. It is about teaching those willing to learn. The wind stirred, lifting small leaves and dust, and the cadets felt the subtle yet undeniable presence of history and experience enveloping the yard. Jamie, observing from the edge, saw the subtle nod exchanged between Walter and Hayes, an unspoken acknowledgement of service and sacrifice, and he realized the weight of what had just transpired. Even the distant hum of base activity seemed muted, as if the entire world had paused to honor the quiet mastery before them. The cadets shifted uneasily, their earlier confidence replaced by an awareness of responsibility. The sun now low on the horizon painting everything in amber, the shadows deepening, and the subtle, steady exhalation of Walter breaking the tension, reminding them that patience, observation, and respect were lessons far more enduring than any display of bravado. The cadets shifted subtly, the weight of the colonel's presence and Walter's quiet mastery settling like a blanket over the training yard. The last rays of sunlight glinted off brass insignias and the polished edges of the rifle case, each reflection drawing attention to the history etched into every crease of Walter's jacket and the faint scratches along the wooden stock. Ryan felt his shoulders relax slightly, though his chest still thumped with a mixture of awe and newfound respect. Mike and Lucas exchanged glances, the pride that had propelled them into recklessness now replaced with contemplation, their minds replaying every subtle cue from the old Marine, the way he had maintained calm and authority without raising his voice once. Walter shifted slightly, glancing at each cadet in turn, his pale blue eyes steady and knowing, the years behind them visible in the depth and quiet assurance of his gaze. Captain Mercer moved closer, his voice lowered, not commanding but explanatory. Walter Thompson has served with distinction far beyond anything you have encountered. He does not need to assert himself. He simply exists, and that presence carries the lessons you will not find in any textbook. The wind stirred, lifting dust and small leaves across the concrete, each particle catching the last light of day, as if nature itself had paused to observe the encounter. Walter's hand rested lightly on the rifle case, the faint smell of oil and worn leather rising, carrying memories of faraway jungles, long marches, and disciplined drills that had honed him into a quiet force of experience. Jamie, observing from the edge of the formation, noticed the subtle exchange of nods between Walter and the colonel, a silent acknowledgement that required no words, only understanding. The cadet's fingers twitched slightly, recalling the tension that had filled the air just moments before, the sharpness of youth tempered now by the gravity of the moment. A distant bird called from the tree-line, its voice cutting softly through the muted hum of bass activity, a reminder that life moved forward even as the lessons settled firmly in place. Walter spoke, calm and deliberate, each word carrying weight without volume. Respect is observed through attention, through patience, and through acknowledgement of experience. Learn that, and you will understand more than any drill or exercise could teach you. Ryan, Lucas, and Mike absorbed the statement, their postures shifting further into deference, understanding now that the power of presence could outweigh the loudest commands or threats. Captain Mercer nodded once, approvingly, recognizing the transformation unfolding among the cadets, the subtle but undeniable recognition of mastery and dignity. The sun dipped fully below the horizon, the yard bathed in a warm amber glow that softened the edges of tents and concrete, highlighting the worn details of the rifle case, the patches, and the lined face of Walter Thompson. The cadets exhaled slowly, the air around them lighter, carrying not relief but comprehension, a realization of lessons that could not be taught in ordinary ways. Walter straightened slightly, his stance unchanging yet somehow inviting observation, and the cadets found themselves standing taller, not from fear, but from recognition of the quiet authority that came from a life of disciplined service and unspoken courage. The wind whispered through the trees, the shadows lengthened, and the yard held a stillness that would linger long after they departed, a testament to the power of patience, dignity, and silent mastery. The yard had settled into a heavy quiet, broken only by the distant hum of bass activity and the occasional rustle of leaves stirred by the evening wind. Walter Thompson adjusted his stance slightly, the faint creak of leather from the rifle case echoing softly across the asphalt. The cadets remained still, their eyes wide, absorbing the presence of the old Marine and the colonel's authority that now seemed to envelop them. Ryan shifted uneasily, noticing the depth of history etched into Walter's lined face, the pale blue eyes that carried decades of untold stories, each glance a lesson in patience, observation, and quiet strength. Mike and Lucas were equally captivated, their earlier bravado replaced by introspection, the weight of their earlier actions pressing on them in a new way. Captain Mercer observed carefully, noting the subtle but profound shift in posture and attention among the cadets, recognizing the moment as one that would resonate far beyond the confines of the training yard. Walter's gaze swept over the group, lingering on each cadet for just a moment, enough to convey acknowledgement without words, the kind of recognition that speaks to understanding and growth. The soft glow of the setting sun highlighted the worn textures of his jacket, the weathered wood and steel of the M40 rifle case, and the faded Marine Corps patch that had survived decades of service. A gentle breeze carried the scent of pine and dry asphalt, and with it, a sense of stillness that seemed almost reverent, as though the yard itself acknowledged the presence of someone extraordinary. Walter's voice, low and measured, finally broke the silence. True mastery is not measured by force or speed, but by understanding, presence, and the choices one makes when no one is watching. The cadets absorbed the words, their minds replaying the tension, the observation, the subtle cues that had gone unnoticed until now. Jamie, standing slightly apart from the group, felt the full weight of the lesson, the quiet authority of Walter and the silent confirmation from Colonel Hayes pressing in, leaving an imprint that would endure far beyond this afternoon. Shadows lengthened across the yard, stretching toward the distant tree-line, blending with the warm amber light, and the cool evening air began to temper the heat of the day, each breath drawing the cadets deeper into contemplation. Walter allowed a small nod, a gesture of finality, not triumph, not boast, but quiet acknowledgement of a duty fulfilled and a lesson imparted. The cadets instinctively straightened further, their movements no longer reflexive but deliberate, understanding that they were in the presence of someone whose experience and judgment surpassed any immediate measure of rank or authority. The distant calls of birds faded, replaced by the subtle whisper of wind and the soft settling of dust, the yard now holding a moment suspended between history and the present. Walter shifted the rifle case slightly, the movement deliberate and calm, signaling the end of the immediate encounter. And yet the weight of what had transpired remained palpable, a lesson of restraint, observation, and respect woven into the very air around them. Captain Mercer finally exhaled, a slow, steady release, allowing the cadets to feel the release of tension without diminishing the significance of the moment. The sun dipped fully behind the tree line, casting a final amber hue across the yard, the shadows deepening, and the figures of Walter, Mercer, and the cadets stood bathed in that warm, reflective light, each understanding in their own way that the events of this day would remain with them, a quiet testament to the enduring power of dignity, mastery, and the silent lessons of a Marine legend. The yard had fallen into a deep stillness, the kind that carries the weight of unspoken understanding. Walter Thompson straightened fully, his posture relaxed yet commanding, each movement deliberate and measured, a demonstration of years lived with discipline and purpose. The cadets, Ryan, Mike, and Lucas, stood in silence, their earlier impatience replaced by a reflective awareness, their eyes tracing the lines of the old Marine's face, noting every detail. The faint wrinkles around his eyes, the steady breathing, the calm focus that seemed to radiate outward and settle over the yard like a protective shield. Captain Mercer glanced toward them, his expression softened, a subtle nod acknowledging that the lesson had been absorbed in full measure. The last glow of sunset highlighted the contours of Walter's worn jacket, the edges of the Marine Corps patch, and the smooth wooden stock of the M40 rifle case, the textures whispering stories of distant jungles, long marches, and quiet victories earned over decades. A soft breeze passed through, stirring the leaves of the nearby trees and carrying a faint scent of pine and warm asphalt, a natural punctuation to the gravity of the moment. Walter's gaze swept over the cadets one final time, pale blue eyes meeting theirs directly, conveying more than words could express, a silent imparting of wisdom. Strength, patience, and dignity are cultivated over a lifetime and do not require validation from others. Jamie, watching from the edge, felt a profound shift within himself, a recognition that true authority does not need to be boisterous to be undeniable, and that the quiet confidence of experience can command respect more effectively than any loud declaration or display. The cadets exhaled slowly, the air around them lighter, yet heavy with the weight of understanding, a realization that their actions, attitudes, and assumptions had been measured against a standard far higher than they had anticipated. Colonel Hayes stepped back slightly, allowing the moment to settle fully, his presence reinforcing the unspoken lesson, an embodiment of the chain of respect and accountability that had defined the lives of men like Walter Thompson. The sun disappeared fully behind the horizon, shadows lengthening and blending into the growing dusk, and the yard seemed to hold its breath as if aware of the gravity of what had occurred. Walter reached for the rifle case, lifting it with the ease of decades of practice, then set it down gently, signaling that the formal interaction had ended, yet leaving an enduring imprint on every cadet present. The cadets shifted their weight, standing a little straighter, eyes wide with a blend of awe and newfound comprehension, their hands empty but minds full, absorbing the quiet mastery they had witnessed. Walter finally nodded once, a subtle acknowledgement of the lesson imparted and the respect earned, then exhaled slowly, allowing the moment to dissolve naturally into the evening air. Captain Mercer lowered his hands, the tension in his shoulders easing as he watched the cadets internalize the weight of what they had experienced. The wind carried a soft rustle through the trees, the distant hum of base activity continuing unnoticed, and the training yard remained suspended in a rare and solemn stillness, the echoes of the day's lesson etched into every surface, every shadow, and every heartbeat of those who had witnessed it. And as darkness began to settle over the yard, it was clear to everyone present that some lessons, the most important ones, require no words, no force, only the quiet presence of someone who has lived them fully.